This happened back when I was in college. I was a freshman and living in the freshman dorms. It was a large dorm building and my floor was all female. I had my own dorm room, which was very nice because I didn't have to share it with a roommate. Other than the little bit of extra space though, it was a pretty typical college dorm room. The university that I went to was large and I quickly made a good number of friends. It became a normal routine for me to spend time with my new college friends quite a bit. We would do homework and study together and hang out on the weekends. Sometimes I would go to parties with them or sports games and things like that. One weekend I was with my friends until really late at night. I hadn't even been drinking, but I stayed out until like 2 a.m. I got back to my dorm room and was so tired that I pretty much went right to sleep. And in doing so, I forgot to lock the door to my room. The next thing that I knew, I was waking up sometime later in the night. When I awoke, I saw that it was still completely dark out, but the very next instant, I heard that my door was opening. That brought in a little bit of light, and I saw what appeared to be a man standing in the doorway. He appeared to be looking at me, but in the lighting, I only really saw a silhouette mostly. But even with what little I could see, the man did not appear to be a college guy, and certainly not anybody that I knew. I kept watching, wondering what was going on. He didn't say anything, but just stood in the doorway looking at me for at least a minute. Then the man opened the door even more and was completely inside my room. He slowly and quickly closed the door behind him. At this point, I was really creeped out. When he was closing the door though, I got a good enough look at him to see that he was way older than most college students. He was at least in his 40s, probably his 50s if I had to guess. The man stood in the doorway for a little while. I was sort of pretending to be asleep, opening my eyes a tiny bit. The room was so dark though that it was hard to see anything, and now that the door was closed, it was even more difficult to see. The man then moved so that he was sort of out of my sight, going behind the end of my bed. I knew that I had to do something. I quickly sat up and reached for the drawer of my nightstand that was next to me. My dad had bought me some pepper spray and gave it to me for protection at college. I had never actually taken it out with me because I didn't think that I would ever need it, so I just put it in my drawer. But now, I was really glad that my dad had got it for me. After I got up, the man heard me and he moved out from where he was. He did not leave my room though. Instead, he started walking closer to me. In the dark, I was desperately fumbling around the drawer through all the junk trying to find the pepper spray. Thankfully, it was open because of course my dad had demonstrated to me how to use it. I finally found it and the man was now just feet away from me. He didn't say anything. He was just walking right towards me kind of slow. I pointed the pepper spray at him, but I don't know if he even saw it with how dark it was. Then I just started spraying. At first, I didn't know if it did anything because the man didn't run away. In fact, he got even closer. He reached out and almost grabbed it out of my hands. Then I started yelling really loud. I kept spraying, and some of it got in the air towards my face, and it definitely worked. When I kept spraying, it started to affect the guy more. I was yelling as loud as I could and spraying pepper spray everywhere. The combination caused the man to finally leave. He quickly ran away and out the door, then he left. I went over and locked the door, and for a few minutes I was too shocked to do anything. It all happened so fast, and I was shaking from the experience. Soon there was a knock on my door. I didn't want to answer it and was still holding the pepper spray. Then I heard a voice say, "Campus safety." Only then did I go over and look through the door. I saw that it was in fact a campus safety officer. I answered, and he said that there was reports of loud yelling and wanted to know if everything was okay. I told him what happened, and he ended up contacting the police. There was a search for the guy, but he was not found. I still don't know who he was. That was the only time anything like that happened to me in my time at college. I'm really glad that my dad got me that pepper spray. This story takes place several years ago now. At the time, I lived in an apartment by myself. I don't live there anymore and only lived in this particular place for 1 year. So it was a pretty decent apartment complex. The building was pretty new, probably less than 10 years old. It was clean for the most part and a nice place to live. Very shortly after I moved into my place is when this happened. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of the building. I was inside my place one night and it was getting pretty late. Things were quiet because of this, and out of nowhere I heard a knocking coming from the wall. This wall led to the apartment that was next to mine. I didn't know who lived there and had never seen them or anything. They knocked on the wall and then stopped, and then they knocked again. I had no idea why they would be knocking. It sounded very deliberate, not like they had bumped into the wall by accident or something. But I wasn't making any loud noises or anything. Things had been very quiet. I was confused. The knocking stopped for a short time, and then I heard it again. It was really strange. I thought about knocking back because I was kind of frustrated. I mean, I wasn't doing anything, and it was late at night. Why would they be knocking on the wall like that? Eventually, it stopped though, and I just let it go. By the next day, I forgot all about it. However, that night, it happened again, and I was reminded. The knocking started up right about at the same time as the previous night, if I had to guess. I didn't know what to make of this. Again, I wasn't being noisy at all, and nobody in the building seemed to be making a lot of noise, so it's not like they mistaked me for somebody being loud. It was very confusing. Like before, they knocked a few times on the wall and then stopped. Then, like a minute later, they knocked again. It was very strange. Eventually, again it stopped, and it was done for the night. The next day, I found out that the apartment next to mine was called a show unit. This means that nobody lives there, and when people get a tour of the apartment, they show them that one. That was even more confusing to me then, because that meant that nobody lived there. So why was I hearing knocking coming from that apartment very late at night? It was really strange. And that night, I heard it again. It was probably at around the same time as before. I wasn't looking at a clock, so I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing that it was. I was so curious about it, so this time I decided to investigate. I got up and walked out the front door of my apartment. I was now out in the hallway, and I walked towards the one next to mine. Things were very quiet, and nobody was out in the hallway at this hour. I approached the door to the apartment next to mine, and I noticed something. It was actually open. I couldn't really see inside, but the door was not shut all the way. It was resting against the door frame, but not closed. I walked closer to it, and then decided to open it further. I knew this was nobody's place, so nobody should be inside of it. When I pushed the door open, I saw all the lights inside were off, so I couldn't see who or if anybody was actually in there. It was really quiet as well. I started to take a step inside, and then I heard footsteps. They were far away, but inside of the apartment, and the footsteps were heading in my direction. I got so freaked out that I just turned around and left. I quickly walked out of the apartment and then back to mine. I went back in and locked the door behind me. Probably 10 seconds after I was back in my place, I heard footsteps out in the hallway. Then they went right up to my door and somebody tried opening it. I was so creeped out by this point. After attempting to enter my place, they did not knock, but I heard them walking away. I went to the door and looked out, but they were gone by then. It was very strange. After that night, I never heard any more knocking coming from there. I still don't know who it was or why they were doing it. One Friday night last summer, I was home alone while my family, besides my sister who was at work, stayed at the cabin. I'm used to staying home alone as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially when I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, since I'm used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him. Plus, if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. He's the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the doors or windows. So, the sound of his barks at nearly midnight were concerning. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I left where I slept in the basement and walked upstairs to check it out. As I'd suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I had let Bosco, the dog's name, out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I'm a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and things like that, so I would never while home alone forget to close the door, and I'm 100% certain of that. I figured Bosco did his job, and the intruder was scared away upon opening the door and seeing the dog right there barking at him. I closed and locked the door, double-checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease. Upon finding nothing, I went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there, trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walked around for about 10 minutes before I put my earphones in and talked myself down until I could fall asleep. At about 2 a.m. that same night, my sister came home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement whining at my door. He's not supposed to be in the basement. There's even a gate to stop him from getting to the basement. When I got up to let him outside, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him back in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs, and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door being ajar, busy with work for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until a few days later. My sister and mom were home with me for a movie night. I remembered the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up. She said that same night, an hour or so after she got home, she went to the kitchen and the door was open again. That same door that was locked from the inside and not opened since earlier that night. I couldn't believe it, and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away, saying that maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it, until we both realized that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in and not steal anything and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked somebody in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of the house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there, now knowing that the house was not empty and there was also a dog who would bark at them if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly with when my sister would have found the door open once more. She said this time it was much wider than when I had found it, and this makes sense if they were in a hurry on the way out and didn't bother to close it. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I'm not fully sure why Bosco wasn't going crazy at the man the whole time. Maybe some treats were involved, or maybe he just calmed down and didn't worry about the intruder after he initially entered the house. It was so strange, especially with nothing from our house missing. But in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins. The other break-ins normally had nothing missing. It would be the same as what happened to us, literally only the break-in and entering part. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of somebody being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. When my brother and I were around 12 years old, in like 2006, we were at my dad and stepmom's house in the afternoon, probably around 3 p.m., so still broad daylight. My brother and I were the only two people home because my dad, stepmom, and younger siblings were in a nearby town for their youth soccer game. The two of us were lounging in my dad's room, which was located at the back of the house, and watching a movie when we heard a knock on the front door. My brother and I grew up with our single mom, and we were latchkey kids, so being home alone and having people stop by wasn't concerning or weird for us, especially back in those days where it was more common for friends to drop by your house to see if you were home, since not every kid had a cell phone to keep in touch. But on this day, we were at my dad's house like I said, and I didn't know anybody in the neighborhood, so the knock on the door was weird since none of our friends or relatives lived nearby to come over randomly. Both of us wanted to ignore the knocking and wait for the person to go away, but being latchkey kids in a house where it wasn't normal for people to stop by unexpectedly, my instinct was to go and make sure that the door was locked. We knew better than to go out and make our presence known, and we for sure were not going to open the door. But in my mind, there was no getting around one of us going to make sure nothing was unlocked. I knew my brother, and I could tell that he wasn't going to do it, so I volunteered because it was an overwhelming priority. I got up and stealthily creeped down the hallway leading from my dad's room to the front door. There was a window next to the door, so I crouched around and very carefully peeked between the blinds before I reached out, twisting the door lock as silently as I could. It had been unlocked, so I'm very glad that I went to check. When I was peeking out the window, I saw a middle-aged man, slim and tall but not huge. He was bald on the top, with some short salt and pepper hair wrapping around the sides of his head. He had his hands behind his back, I can't recall if it was one hand or both, and in one of his hands was a metal object that I took for a knife, but to this day I can't say for sure what he was holding. He did not see me looking at him through the window, or if he did, he at least didn't look at me and let me know that he knew I was there. The way our house was designed, the front door was not visible from the street because there were bushes and tall trees blocking it. My 12-year-old heart sank knowing this random guy was at the door with what I thought was a knife behind his back, or at the very least a metal object that the man felt was necessary to put behind his back. It was especially terrifying because I recognized it was not super unrealistic since the man would not be visible from the street, and therefore he could hide something behind his back without worrying about the neighbors' cars passing by seeing him. This house would be a good target for somebody looking to do bad stuff, since you'd be shielded from being seen. At this point, normal paranoia became full-on fight-or-flight panic mode. It was like a switch was flipped from me just checking to see if the door was locked, to thinking there was a guy with a knife at the door who wanted to kill us. I creeped back to my dad's room and told my brother what I'd seen. He grabbed the house phone. I can't remember if there was one in my dad's room or if he had to go to another room, but before long he was speaking with my dad on the phone. My dad immediately instructed us to let his dog, a Rhodesian Ridgeback, in from the backyard. Let me tell you, in a situation of pure terror, having a big loud dog was the only bit of hope and relief. From there, my brother and I locked ourselves in a bathroom by the front door, not sure why we decided to hide in the closest room to the guy outside. But from inside the bathroom we called 911 while my brother clutched a kitchen knife, both of us crying and struggling to get words out to the operator. While in the bathroom, I heard the front door handle being twisted around, which would have meant that the guy was now trying to enter the house. The bathroom was only about 7 feet from the front door, so I could hear it loud and clear. I have such a vivid memory of us huddling in that bathroom, feeling truly helpless and out of control of what might happen next, with the only comfort being the noise of the dog barking at the front door. If the guy decided to kick the door down, he'd have to deal with a big dog and then have a knife fight with 2 kids. I was really hoping that the dog would hold it down for us, because I didn't like our odds if the man at the door got past him. Before long, the cops arrived, and shortly after, my dad and stepmom got home too. The guy was gone by then, and nothing ever came of it. To this day, my dad's theory is that the guy at the door was his neighbor coming over to complain, because apparently his dog would always bark at the neighbor while he was doing yard work. So my dad thinks the neighbor was trimming the bushes, and therefore just happened to have clippers or something in his hands when he came over to complain. Sounds reasonable enough, but I wish I had asked at the time to see the neighbor, because then I could truly identify him and know what the situation was. Personally, I'm open to my dad's theory, but it always seemed to me that my dad clung to it more for his own comfort, since the alternative would have been a parent's nightmare. If it were the neighbor though, some things didn't make sense. Like the guy conveniently showing up when no cars were in my dad's driveway since they left to go to the soccer game only 20 minutes prior. Seems like coming over when it appeared nobody was home would be a weird thing if you expected your neighbor to answer the door. Also, the guy trying to twist the handle was not a very neighborly act, trying to enter someone else's home while they're gone. Either way, whether the threat was real or imagined by my brother and I, it was very scary, especially if I hadn't got there in time to lock the door. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. My grandma would drop me off at around 3 p.m. and my parents would be home around 4:30 p.m. Not that big of a deal. Today, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, and my mom, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even get dark until like 8:30 p.m. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. That day, it was just me and my friend Seth. I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. Nobody should have been home there until about 7 p.m. My house is set up to where the upstairs has windows that look over my driveway. So with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than expected. I looked outside. It was a red truck. Nobody that I knew drove a red truck. The person pulled into the middle of my driveway sideways like he owned the place. When I looked out of the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so nobody should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to the front door. I thought that maybe it was one of my dad's friends, or somebody who my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if somebody was going to be coming over. Soon after, I heard a knock at the door. I went to my other window that had a better view of the walkway up to the front door. I saw the guy walking back down the walkway. I switched to looking through the windows overlooking my driveway. I was relaying all of this to Seth with my mic still on. The man walked past his truck and tried to open my garage side door. At that point, my heart sank. I told Seth that this guy tried to get into my house. Mind you, it was literally broad day at like 5 p.m. Luckily, the garage side door was locked because sometimes we forgot to lock it. After he tried the door, he started walking to my back patio. I dropped my headset and I quietly ran downstairs to see what he was doing. I got downstairs and stood behind the wall so I wouldn't be visible to the back door or living room windows. I just listened. I heard him trying to open the door. Then I heard a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I was more scared than I had ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross the living room to get there, and he would be able to see me if I went into there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner, and he was gone. I ran back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I was telling him this, I heard a car door shut. This time when I looked out the window, he finally got back into his truck. I looked at the truck closer and noticed the only things he had in his truck were a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes. During this time, Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate, but he was parked where I couldn't see it. Then he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I got to the back door and saw that the doormat was moved. Both large plant pots had been moved as well. He was looking for a key, and we did have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch, and all those pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I could have done if he was able to find the key or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. The guy never came back.